Opening credits. Ava and Carol Detective Agency. The Mystery of Solomon's Ring. Chapter 4. Pantsing. It's a thing.
"Oh man, Ava,"
murmured Carol.
"I don't know about this."
"Why are you worried? Look at those biceps," said Ava as she poked her friend's arms. "The bad guys would take one look at those bad boys and bolt."
"My biceps look like very tiny, sad, deflated balloons,"
said Carol, flexing as she walked by a pastry window. "You need to be more positive," implored Ava. "Is the balloon half full or half empty?"
"I think your brain is half empty."
The girls had spent a wonderful morning with Mrs. Clark, sitting out on the balcony, eating breakfast, watching Florence come to life. Carol thought it was amazing, like a Broadway production. The trio took turns guessing the occupations of different people as they passed beneath their balcony at the St. Regis. The morning brought tranquility and renewed hope. To Carol, it seemed as if the events of the night before had been a dream. A beautiful gondola, shaped like an elf's shoe, passed by. A man dressed in black pants with a blue and white striped shirt expertly navigated the river using a long paddle. Everything seemed so peaceful, just how she had imagined Italy. Ava had convinced their mother that the owner of the bookstore could barely walk, much less move, and that there was no one to help her since her husband was sick and frail. She insisted that they help the poor old woman, who was probably at this very moment sitting on the floor, surrounded by piles of books, sobbing. It took some incredible acting, but Ava was able to convince her mother that only they could help the poor bookstore owner. Mrs. Clark finally agreed, but she insisted that the girls had to go straight to the store and then text her immediately when they arrived safely. They, of course, did not mention their true intentions: find the other half of the ring and find out if the lady had any connections to anyone named Luca, or if she had any idea how they could find Luca. As if on cue, Ava and Carol stopped just around the corner of the bookstore, far enough away that they could just peek at the entrance. There were still a few fragments of glass trapped within the coarse stonework, glimmering in the afternoon sun. From their angle, they couldn't see much else. A kind of nervous air hung between the two friends as they peered into the bookstore. Ava quickly texted her mom, letting her know that they had arrived safely at the bookstore and that she was the best mom who had ever lived. Ava glanced over at Carol, who was feverishly biting her lip. "Someday, you're going to chew your lip off, and they're going to have to make you a new lip. And just so you know, I am not donating part of my lip for your lip replacement." Carol turned to face Ava.
"Really? That's where you draw the friendship line? We are risking going back to the store and having the owner call the police on us."
"We have to check it out," Ava insisted. "It's the only way to figure out if she knows anything about Luca and if the second part of the ring is there. As far as your lip is concerned, I have no comment." Ava slipped her hand into her jacket, feeling the envelope against her fingertips. She was all too aware that such a wild part of this crazy adventure was sitting just in her pocket.
"Why do I always let you talk me into these crazy things? Let's go for a walk at night in a foreign city. Let's chase after crazy kidnappers," Carol muttered beneath her breath. "Now is not the time for thought and reasoning," Ava tisked, swatting her best friend. A clatter came from inside the bookstore, and a woman's voice speaking angrily in Italian quickly followed. Ava's eyes widened. They noticed the shattered pane in the door had been replaced with cardboard,
with the word aperto handwritten on it.
Ahem,
said Carol, grabbing Ava's shoulder.
You know, we could come back later. She seems really focused and...
Ava rolled her eyes and shrugged her shoulder free. She slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside.
Che cosa? Chi c'è?
What? Who is there? They stopped just inside the doorway, looking at each other. Neither said a word until Ava's shoulder bumped Carol's. She shot her friend a look.
Say something. Buongiorno, ma'am. It's us, the 2 girls from your shop last night,
Carol said loudly, but she didn't walk closer for fear that the woman would chuck a book at them. Ava didn't blame her. Strange, angry Italian women were at the top of her list as the scariest people ever, followed by angry Italian kidnappers, then rollerblade aficionados next.
Ah, the little girls who were in trouble,
she said.
Come in. Do not be ghosts in the doorway.
Ava wanted to volunteer that she was not a little girl, that she was 12 and basically a normal human being at that point, but it was obvious that the bookstore owner had been through a lot and didn't need to be argued with. Ava took a step forward, and without missing a beat, Carol walked with her. As they came into fuller view of the room, Ava looked around and recognized the bookstore's interior. It looked so different in the daylight. Dusty yellow sunlight lit up the books that still lay strewn across the floor, along with the upturned tables and chairs, broken glass, and spilled objects. Dust that hadn't quite settled floated in the air, particles catching the light. In the center of all of it was the woman, her graying hair tied up in a bun with a red bandana to keep the flyaways back. She had a dirty apron tied around her waist, her floral skirt swaying past her calves. Obviously, one book this woman was missing from her collection was one on fashion, thought Ava. Bandanas are so 1980s. Carol, however, could clearly see the lines on her face, and she felt another pang of sadness. The woman had made some progress, but for the most part, the place was still a mess.
Whoa,
Carol breathed as she looked around. Ava nodded. It looked worse, actually, since they could see all the damage this time.
Why you just stand there? The woman demanded. I do not have time for visitors who want to watch as I work. Mi dispiace, Carol said, stammering. She cleared her throat. May we help you? Why? You make this mess? The woman barked. The girls jumped. She looked the pair up and down for a moment. With a dry laugh, she swept an arm across the room. Terrible. They destroy my shop and do not even have the decency to leave, what do you Americans say, a vacuum? Ava giggled. Because that's the right way to leave a place like this, right? So long as they hand you a dustpan at the end. She snorted. If only. Well, I needed some new displays, she said, looking at 2 smashed tables laying at her feet. Now these ruffians have given me the opportunity. But if you want to help, start by shelving the books. They're everywhere. The girls nodded, jumping into action. Carol crouched down, picking up an armful of biographies. What are your names again? Asked the woman as she righted a table. I'm Ava, and this is Carol, said Ava, gesturing to each of them. She's the one with the large biceps. I'm better known for my incredibly high IQ and ability to annoy everyone. Carol laughed, interrupting her. The woman chuckled. You may call me Signora Coppola. Buongiorno,
offered Ava, curtsying.
Dear Lord,
whispered Carol, shaking her head at Ava.
She's not the queen.
It's a buongiorno, corrected Signora Coppola. Treat her like one word. And now, books. She fluttered a hand toward the ground. Libros, answered Ava proudly, gesturing at the books.
No,
said Carol, smacking the back of Ava's head.
She wants you to pick up the books.
Carol looked at Ava, who shrugged and bent down to start gathering books. Every once in a while, Ava would pick up a book to show Carol, who would ooh and try to translate the title. Signora Coppola would roll her eyes when they did this, but not in a bad way, Ava thought. She looked like she found the girls funny, which relieved both of them. The last thing they wanted was to upset her.
I guess this one would stay the same,
Carol chuckled as she held up the binding of a Harry Potter book. Only if you say it right, Ava replied.
Ma'am, how do you pronounce Harry Potter with an Italian accent?
Better than if you say it with an American one, answered the woman, and the three of them laughed. Carol smiled. She liked Signora Coppola. Her store had been ransacked, furniture broken, and yet she was humming what Carol imagined was a popular Italian tune. She was happy they were helping her. Ava returned to the front of the store near the doorway, where she had found the envelope that contained the ring and the symbol. Pretending to be placing books on a lower shelf, she crouched down and began searching the floor for the other half of the ring. The door to the bookstore opened, nearly smacking her in the forehead, and a tall man walked into the store and stood quietly. Carol and Signora Coppola didn't appear to notice as they righted a table.
Signora Coppola, may I ask you a question?
asked Carol. Signora Coppola answered her, but Ava didn't hear. Her eyes were on the newcomer, and she was frozen to the spot. Oh my God, she thought. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Carol knew she was putting a lot on the line, but she felt like she could trust Signora Coppola.
The old man that was taken from your store last night, he said, find Luca as he was being dragged away. Do you know what?
Carol stopped mid-sentence and followed Signora Coppola's stare. She felt her throat constrict, her heart threatening to beat right out of her chest. The man made his way through the room, casually picking up a fallen book and examining it, and then placing it on a table.
Mi scusi, signore, come posso aiutarla?
Signora Coppola said to the man.
How can I help you?
Carol quickly translated in her head. She looked at the man, her lips squeezed shut to keep her jaw from dropping. She could see Ava by the door. Her face wore an expression of frantic disbelief. Why was he here? Did he have any idea who they were? Slightly, ever so slightly, Carol shook her head once. Ava nodded once in return. Her expression molded, to the best of her ability, into one of normalcy. The two continued to pick up books, though much more stiffly than before. Neither of them could say it out loud, but they both knew it. The man was one of the kidnappers from the night before.
Buon pomeriggio,
he said, nodding to the woman, an empty smile filling his face. He took out a badge and showed it to the woman, who walked forward to look closer.
My name is Inspector Rossi,
he said in Italian.
I am looking into the intrusion and attack that occurred here last night. I was wondering if you found anything that may be of interest, say a wallet, keys, anything.
As she responded, Carol did everything she could to avoid looking at him. The girls cringed when they heard Signora Coppola motion toward the girls and mention their names. Ava looked up sneakily, her eyes hidden by her side bangs. The man was studying the two of them, a suspicious look appearing on his face. Ava looked away, heart thrumming in her chest. She was shaking, and she could only hope it wasn't too noticeable.
"Grazie, signora,"
he said to the woman. He turned to the girls, dipping his chin and flashing a smile, along with his badge.
"How nice Signora Coppola has some helpers. She informs me you two girls were here last night during this, tragic event."
He shook his head, glancing around and making a sound with his tongue.
"Truly terrible."
Now that he came closer, Carol could see that his eyebrows were thick and hung over his eyes like drapes, shading them. He had a long, thin nose and a bottom lip that dwarfed his upper lip. He smiled easily, but there was something off about the way he did, like he had 100 secrets, and it was so funny that the world didn't know a single one. Carol decided that even if he wasn't a kidnapper, which he totally was, she'd dislike him anyway. Similarly, next to her, Ava was looking at the man coolly. Carol recognized that expression. If he tried to grab them, punch him in the nose. His grin widened, and Ava was sure it wasn't just her imagination that it turned eviler the farther it stretched. He resembled a real-life Grinch. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a notebook.
Yes, here we are. I simply need to review my fellow officers' notes with you. So, you two girls were witnesses to the crime?"
he asked. His lips formed into a smile, but his eyes filled with pure evil. His hand carefully brushed open his jacket so only Ava could see the taser hooked to his belt. Ava looked at Carol, not sure how to respond. If they didn't play along, he may hurt them, or worse, Signora Coppola. Signora Coppola looked at them quizzically.
"He is an inspector, girls."
She nodded at them briskly.
"Go on, answer him." "Perhaps the girls would feel more comfortable at the stazione di polizia. We could stop and pick up your parents, of course,"
he said, nodding towards Signora Coppola.
"Perhaps this would be more agreeable."
Ava tried to convey the fact that something was wrong to Signora Coppola through her eyes, but she simply seemed to think the girls were being disrespectful. "My parents don't like police stations or post offices. Nothing personal." He inched closer, and instinctively the two inched away.
"This is a very serious crime. I'm quite sure you would like to help us solve it, not only for the poor man who was kidnapped, but also for your friend, Signora Coppola."
Signora Coppola looked from the girls back to the man, confusion filling her face.
"Look,"
Rossi said, spreading out his hands.
"My partner is outside. Let's say we take a nice ride to the police station."
He leaned in uncomfortably close enough that they could smell the sourness of old coffee on his breath. Ava wrinkled her nose.
"Ick. Perhaps a nice ride will jar your memory."
Ava slowly shook her head at Carol.
"I think Ava should call her mom and meet us here. Then we can follow you to the police station. Besides, you need our help. We're not the ones that committed the crime, so we are doing you a favor."
Rossi's smile twisted and became a tight, thin line on his face. His eyes narrowed. He was just about to speak when Ava started.
"Besides,"
said Ava, looking between the inspector and her best friend. "I just remembered we haven't had lunch. You may not have hangry here in Italy, but back in the States, believe me, it's a real thing."
"What?"
Rossi spun around, facing Ava.
"This is maddening,"
he yelled, jabbing his finger forcefully into her sternum.
"You will come with me, and you will come with me now." "Now wait a minute,"
cried out Signora Coppola.
"They are children. What are you doing?"
Ava stepped backwards, but her foot caught on a small tower of books. With a cry, she tripped and fell, falling on her butt. She blinked and saw a tattered white envelope on the floor next to her. She gasped. It had fallen out of her pocket. Right in front of her eyes, almost in slow motion, the ring slipped out of the envelope, rolling on the floor before it stopped. Ava quickly grabbed the ring and paper and shoved them into her pocket. Haphazardly, with electricity pumping through her fingertips, she looked up. The man's eyes were glued on Ava's pocket. He was basically salivating. Ava blinked and realized with horror he had seen the ring. The way he looked at it was like a shark and a small, defenseless fish. The ring had to have something to do with the kidnappers.
"What do we have here?"
he inquired, his voice awkwardly high. Completely absorbed, he took a step closer to Ava, his attention riveted. Ava looked beyond his looming figure for a second to see Carol carefully sneaking behind Rossi.
"Are you hiding evidence from the crime scene?"
Carol had a plan. It was a daring plan, but since it had worked in last year's 6th grade class where Joey Templeton got 3 detentions in a row for pantsing people, it'd probably work here too, right? Praying to whatever saint was in charge of gravity or fashion, Carol yanked down on Rossi's pants with all her might. "Pants!" she shrilled at the top of her lungs, the man's pants pulling at his ankles, with small, cute pigs and strips of bacon dotted all over his boxers.
"Ava, run!"
shouted Carol. She was right. It was time to go. Stumbling over the books, Ava got to her feet.
"Sorry, Signora Coppola,"
Carol yelled, racing toward the door. She glanced behind them to see the man struggling to pull up his pants. Ava slammed both palms into the door, with Carol piling in behind her. The door swung open, crashing into a man with a large bandage on his nose. The impact of the door crushed the cigarette in his mouth and sent him reeling backwards onto the sidewalk. The man grabbed his nose, howling in pain. The girls leapt over him. Looking back over their shoulders, they could see Rossi fighting to regain control of his pants, while Signora Coppola beat him with a large book and pushed him out the door.
"Get them, you idiot!"
Ava heard Rossi's high-pitched voice shout, even though they were already half a block away.
"Get them!"
he screamed.
If you're enjoying Thomas Lockhaven's audiobook content, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help out the channel.